Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar on the state of experience management as part of the Customer Centricity World Series. My name is Mark Hamill, and I'm the CEO of Architect Global, which is running this seventh edition of the Customer Centricity World Series. This program, which has been running across the world for the last 7 years, has attracted companies from every continent, and we have regional awards programs as part of the World Series taking part. And this year, for the first time, we've also installed the CX Honors program, which is something where you can get recognition for a very specific program, initiative, or campaign that you've been running within your CX practice. This will run alongside the traditional awards program, which is category submissions and competition across the 5 regions. The entry deadline is the 5th of May, and the awards will take place again in Dubai on the 8th of October this year. So if you have any questions or would like any more information, please visit the website, customercentricityworldseries.com. We have a QR code which is going to flash up on the next slide, I believe, but we will share that at the end of today's session as well. And to move on, I would like to introduce our two excellent speakers for today, Diane Majors, the co-founder and CXO of Amplify XM, and Michael Hinshaw, founder of M Corp CX. So welcome, Diane and Michael. Over to you, Diane.
Hey, thanks so much. It's great to see some familiar faces and some new faces here. Welcome. We are going to take a helicopter up view of how things are evolving and in experience management and how we see a movement toward operationalization. We'll explain what all that means, but really looking at today, kind of those insights, the trends and actions that we can take. Anybody who knows Michael and I know we're all about the how. And so we want to make sure that you walk away with some actions that you can take to address some of these changes that are occurring and help you boost your practice. I'll introduce myself just briefly. I'm Diane Majors. I have been in this space since 1994. I had a CEO at a large corporation who said, we're going to do everything around the customer, and I want you to make sure that we're engaging them and satisfying them. So that's how I got into the space. I've led in several brands and also have worked as a consultant and then previously CEO for the CXPA. And I am going to introduce my co-author and co-presenter, Michael Hinshaw.
That's great. Thank you, Diane. Again, very happy to be here today and also see some familiar faces. So wonderful seeing those of you again who I've met with previously. Like Diane, started in this space in the late 90s. I actually got into it as I was asked to run a business in a country that I knew very little, in an industry I knew absolutely nothing about. And the principles of experience management kind of drove my insights into and growth in that space. And founded M Corp CX in 2002, and I've been working with organizations of all sizes to improve employee and customer experiences ever since. So thank you. And I just wanted to start briefly with why Diane and I care so deeply about this topic. We wrote experience rules because we kept seeing the same patterns. Organizations are investing in CX, they're building listening programs, creating dashboards, mapping journeys, but nothing fundamental was really changing. Experience wasn't embedded in how decisions are made. It wasn't shaping trade-offs or handoffs or prioritization. It wasn't influencing resources. So the book and everything that we're going to talk about today is really about one idea. It's about moving from experience as a program to experience as a management system. So looking forward to covering, as Diane said, helicopter view, some of the trends and things that we're seeing in that area. But really, it's about how do you make experience something that you do every day in your organization, not just a department or a separate thing that somebody else is responsible for. How do you operationalize it in ways that actually drive business results? So Diane, back to you.
Fabulous. So just to take you through today, we're going to talk a little bit about the evolution and and why some things need to change for us. We keep seeing all of these little bit of doomsday, like CX is going away. Experience can't go away. It's the way that organizations need to grow. You're completely dependent on your customers for your revenue. So how can you not include that and not include the ability to serve those customers? We're going to talk a little bit about that. Sorry about that. My mouse is tricky. We're going to talk just a little bit about the current state, kind of a reality check, like what's really going on, what are some of the things that we've seen evolve over time, and what are we going to evolve to next. We'll talk about the 5 key trends that are going to shape this next era of experience management and what are those things that are really driving it. We also, as I said at the beginning, want to provide you with practical frameworks to make sure that you can take away some of the things we're going to do, and then we'll talk about some of those actions in the next 90 days as you set your strategy for the next week, the next year, and your organization is trying to start to achieve those strategic goals. So I'll just start by saying, why is this evolution necessary? And talk a little bit about some of the things that we're seeing when we look at some of the things that are being written about it. This is really a huge inflection point for us. It's not really about transforming CX. We're doing a lot of great work. It's just we're not embedding it into the way the organization works every day. And we're not managing it as a system and connecting all the dots for people. We have to be kind of everywhere at once, but that creates its own opportunities. And we have done a lot of great work in pockets of the organization. How do we really make this part of just the way we work? We need to be able to help our organization and our leaders keep pace with customer expectations, address the complexity, including technology and AI and all the things that are happening now that are really pushing us to move faster, and really build leadership accountability to this. So we're going to talk about some of those trends that we're seeing. And one of those trends is that if we think about what's coming, so I always say horizon scanning for me is always saying what's going to happen 3 to 5 years from now. I don't have a crystal ball. None of us do. But we do know that as we hear expectations change, we also know that we've got new generations coming up that we have to care for, and they're going to judge us differently. It's not going to be the same, oh, I'm willing to, spend a lot of time on a phone call, and it's okay, I just expect that now. Oh, no. Expectations are rising all the time. Every organization that's making these headways and movement to improve experience, that sets the new bar. But this group, this generation coming, is going to want that transparency and intellectually and humanely deal with their brands, and they expect brands to understand them, to care for them, to create value for them, and to protect them. And that means data. That means all the other things we think about, my time, my effort. So their expectations are really going to change where we are. And as we move forward and we change things and build better experiences, that, as I said, sets the bar again. Some of the things that we think about are involving. So what's really the challenge? Well, we just talked about this, that experience efforts are often seen kind of as what Michael and I like to call the icing on the cake, like it's kind of a separate thing. And what we really want to see is systemically how it's really baked into everything the organization does. And I'll give you an example of this. In one organization, we took the project management office, and when people came to stage gates for their projects, they were required to show the work that they had done to care for the experience, design for it, get baselines, have a business case around the experience changes and the behaviors they were looking to see from customers before they started. And as they went through stage gates. So that when I say systematically embed it, that's what I mean, is where are we caring for the experience in all of the operations that we have today and all of the interactions, and how can that come to life? We have a lot of data overload. This has not changed. It's actually gotten worse. And now we're getting data all together, but we're still going to have the same challenge. The insights, action, and impact are scarce. They're just not around. We see a little bit of it here and there, but it really needs to be part of how we leverage that data. Data is the fuel, and we've got to be able to use it efficiently. We also see that the positions, the way experience is organized in the operating models and where it sits is part of the opportunity. It's not really a function, it's more of a business capability. When you look at experience rules, if you read the summaries or you read the book, which we hope you will, it's all a capabilities-based model. We're building organizational capabilities. That is a different language that you can use with your leaders. Why do we need to evolve? Well, we talked a little bit about that, but trust, as you've seen, get higher and higher in the metric or feeling that we're after. It's become very fragile and visible as organizations and data breaches and sharing your information and AI gets more creepy than even digital transformation. All of those things are making us evolve. We're also missing signals. So we're going to talk a little bit about signals in a minute, but the intent that we're seeing instead of lagging indicators like metrics, like what a customer actually did, we want to start focusing on the signals of what the customer is doing that we're not catching because we're seeing surveys, response rates are going down. We're either getting very dramatic things. We're not able to really read the data and look at the data in the right way to say, what's the behavior of the customer? What's changing? How are they expressing that emotionally without asking them? So we are using AI to do some of that now. Employees are also overwhelmed. This pressure to move faster, move quicker, get things done. In all actuality, much like we've seen in many other digital transformation, for example, moving to technology, moving to better experiences for the organization, but leaving the customer behind and not designing for them. And then we see the boards and executives expecting proof of value as they look at costs and where they're investing. If we're not telling the same business case that the rest of the executives who are coming to the table for investment are telling, we're not going to get the funding that we need. And as we embed it and we make it part of the organization, you'll find the funding happens because the organization systematically is working together and understanding that these investments have to be made holistically. It can't be Band-Aid investments anymore. It has to be across journeys. It has to be deep within the organization, fixing processes. So what's evolving? The evolved approach is really the system that we talked about, that we're operationalizing, that we're designing intentionally for the human and the emotion of the human, that trust that is important now. The signals and actions are replacing reporting. Dashboards don't really mean a lot. You look at a bunch of numbers, they don't talk about the human element and they don't talk about trust. And value is very visible. Risks, the cost of fragmentation, I like to say, of working in your silos is costly. How are we talking about revenue and cost to serve? So some things to think about as Michael goes into this reality check of, okay, if these are the things that we're facing, what is the reality check for us as practitioners? Michael?
Thank you, Diane. So let's just start with an honest look at where we are. A lot's improved. Listening is broader. Analytics are more sophisticated than ever. Executives are more aware of experienced risk than they ever have been. And still, experienced teams are stuck and leaders are frustrated. And not because they lack data, but because they can't see the impact. And as we think about, the things that are happening today, definitely progress, but a lot of plateaus and persistent gaps. And there's going to be some themes, right? Diane was talking about data. I'm going to talk about data. But the reality is this slide captures some patterns that we see repeating a lot. Voice of customer, employee experience, digital listening, those are all expanded. Dashboards are better, as Diane noted, but awareness is higher. But even though they're better, they're not necessarily being used in ways that are driving change or visible change in the business. That's because when it comes to moving from insights to action, that's where most organizations plateau. And once you plateau, the narrative starts to shift, right? It's like, this is promising, this is interesting. Executives are leaning into it a little bit to understand, but when it goes from that hope that they had to what's going on and the promise of this to what are we actually getting for this, that's the inflection point, and that's where the conversation changes. And that's where that evolution becomes not just necessary, but required. When you think about the frustrations of leaders, and these are themes that Diane and I, and I'm sure that all of you have heard for years. And if those of you who are newer to experience management as a business discipline, it's like, wow, we have lots of data, but we don't know what to do with it. We can't prove value. Well, that same conversation has been going on for quite some time. You can go ahead and flip. So I talked a little about this a moment ago. The gap that matters the most is insight to impact. Not just having data, not just analyzing data, not just finding, nuggets in the data that are important, but actually prioritizing the things you need to do and doing something with it. Because when action lags, friction compounds, broken promises accumulate, teams burn out, customers disengage, and they disengage quietly the vast majority of the time. It's not loud. It doesn't always show up in a quarterly report and usually doesn't show up in a dashboard. But over time, that lack of doing something with your insights that actually changes the way your organization works with your customers, it erodes trust, it erodes margins, and it erodes confidence. So the leadership question is pretty simple. When you think about experience, debt, all those things that compound over time, what is that debt right now? Do you have a clear understanding of what that is, and who owns reducing it? Starting with that, it makes it much easier to find those places where you're actually, dragging across your organization, where your teams are doing heroic extra efforts to try and make customers' lives better and using workarounds to make their lives better so they can do that. And ultimately, you want to focus on the trust in the organization. And this is something we've talked about a few times already. We're going to talk about this some more. Trust, the emotional connection, the belief that a brand is doing something for you instead of doing something to you. Once you lose that, it's difficult, if not impossible, to get it back. So we identified 5 key trends. We could have identified a lot more. There's a lot of things happening in the world of experience management today and things that we're seeing happen across it. But these trends aren't theoretical. They're already shaping expectations. And again, trust, no longer an aspiration, it's a design requirement. Silent signals matter more than survey responses because customers expect unified, seamless continuity. And we're going to talk about each of these 5 things in a little more depth. But experience has to show up financially or it loses priority. And importantly and unsurprisingly, technology is the red thread connecting every one of these trends. We're not going to spend a ton of time talking about AI and tech separately because that's a really important distinction. Technology amplifies what already exists. So if your governance is clear, if you have accountability and clarity around who in your organization is doing what direction you're going, that scales clarity. But if your systems are fragmented, technology just scales fragmentation. If accountability is defined, it accelerates execution. If it isn't, it accelerates confusion. So the real question isn't whether you have advanced tools, because every one of us can access ridiculously interesting, new, advanced technology. Every day I have to say something comes across my desk that blows my mind. And it's a very exciting time to be in business in general. It's a really exciting time to be in customer experience because there's a lot happening right now that's pretty fun. But if your systems aren't designed to treat humans well, and they're not aligned to the outcomes that the people, your employees, your customers find critical and important, then you're going to have a very hard time delivering experiences that help you accomplish your business goals. All right, Diane, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. So let's talk about the trends individually. So we'll kind of ping back and forth. Michael and I will talk about this. We talked about trust and transparency already. It's no longer just a brand value. We can say those things all day long, and people will say trust is the number one thing we want to raise in our organization as a brand. It's really an experience driver. If you look at the analysis you do on your feedback, a lot of those things come down to the way customers feel and how they're telling you this is an issue. But if you look at the root cause of that issue, really the way the human is trying to tell you there's an opportunity, it really comes down to that emotion and that trust. And so designing trust is not easy. Designing trust is about not just thinking about what the customer's doing, but why they're doing it and what value they're looking for. Because if anybody provides me value, if they can save me time as a brand, they have my money. That's what we're trying to understand is how I trust somebody to be consistent, how I trust them with my data, how I trust them with my life, the minutes of my life. We also want to make this transparent to be a measurable outcome. If some of you know Edelman's Trust Index, there's lots of information on this now about how to identify what those factors are and the drivers of trust. So we're reversing that a little bit and saying it's not about the drivers they're telling you, but if you don't have this trust, none of the rest of that's going to matter. It's also about establishing clear AI and governance grounded in human impact. So this is what we see a lot of times now with AI just being applied. But I don't know about you, many times I get to a chat bot. Like I was online the other day and I went to the chat bot because I couldn't find what I was looking for. And the chat bot said to me, "Hey, have you been to our website? Here's the link to go to." I'm like, "You don't know I'm on your website right now. You just popped up. And why are you asking me to go back to where you should know I already am?" So I very quickly lose trust because the brand cannot show me they're being consistent, that they're caring for everything that I do, that they know me. And so that immediately was, I'm going somewhere else. So this is what's happening if we don't think about the human impact of how we present not just AI, but how we present our brand, our people, our interactions, and our engagement. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael to talk a little bit more about, okay, well, how will you know? So let's go back to those silent signals that we talked about.
Yeah. Thanks, Diane. So when we talk about silent signals, it's a real recognition that today the most important things we need to know about our customers rarely are coming from traditional VOC. Um, we need, as practitioners and as influencers within our organizations, to help leadership and our teams understand what's actually happening with our customers. What are they thinking? What are they feeling? What are they doing? And most organizations are still over reliant on surveys. It's really looking backwards through a fairly long lens. But behavior actually tells a different story. And what are customers actually doing? You think about the fact that out of four customers who complain, 96 remain silent, so about 4%. And different studies show different ranges on this, but in general, the takeaway is every time you hear a complaint, there's a whole bunch of people who are not complaining but are not happy. So when you think about abandonment, repetition, escalation, internal workarounds, um, all those customers that do complain, there's going to be many more that don't. So the short version of this is that if you wait for explicit feedback, you're managing the past. Silent signals let you better manage the present. And what silent signals mean is the ability to access the data about your customers that you have, right? Every organization has data. We've talked about that, and you're all aware of this. But how do you pull information from your chat logs? How do you analyze the recordings, from service calls? How do you pull social data into your overall signals to be able to say, where are we gathering information? Where can we gather information? Where does information exist across our organization? And how do we develop those cohesive views that actually help us see the early warning signs? We call that kind of seeing around corners. And I think that's one of the most important things that we as experienced practitioners can do is to help our organizations have the information that allow us to take a look around a corner to see what's coming. It doesn't mean that we're going to be able to manage chaos. None of us can. And I think that there's a fair amount of uncertainty and chaos in the world today. But that being said, if the more we're able to learn about our customers, the more resilient we can be. As organizations, and the more resilient we are, the easier it is to respond to what's happening. That's because leaders who operationalize these signals are able to, increase acquisition and reduce risk before it becomes churn.
Perfect. So thanks, Michael, for that. I think that's one of the things that makes us have the right information to go do what we need to do. And that information can help us with how they're looking at our organization. So the thing that I shared about being online, This isn't about channels and it's not about the departments. It's about continuity of the experience that we're creating for humans. So we really, just as I talked about, expecting these seamless hands off. You should know where I am and what I'm doing. You should have an understanding if I'm rage clicking or I'm looking for something on your website for a long time and I'm searching for a long time, but not staying on and reading anything. Those are all indications. So these silent signals are especially important when we're thinking about it. The internal silos are very visible. And for experienced professionals, I want you to really think about your practice. Are you helping to support the band-aids, or are you encouraging the organization to not only talk about journeys and map them out, but you're looking at the experience of the journey from end to end, upstream and downstream from the opportunity you're trying to solve for, looking behind the scenes to see what are the things that are really happening that need to occur so that this experience becomes consistent and reliable. So those internal silos that we've always said, in addition to leadership support, are important. How are we helping the organization understand this cost of fragmentation and the opportunity that we have to generate revenue and reduce cost by looking at things more holistically? So rather, we now see a lot of things around, and we'll talk about this in a framework of organizations trying to work differently. We'll talk a little bit about the how. This indifference of how people come to the space and say, hey, it has nothing to do with me. That's that department doing X, Y, or Z. They're not able to really see how the human is traversing. And so when we think about a journey, oftentimes a lot of time we see people lay it out and say, okay, this is all the things we're doing. And then, oh yeah, the form goes to the customer. They're not really thinking about the life of that customer and what they're doing outside of that and what they might be in the middle of and context of what that's happening. So we really need to bring these human experiences in that really help with this emotional memory. That's where the debt comes from. Every time you have a bad experience, that little bank account in your head around every time I try that brand, it never quite works. That's we move on. It's a lot of subconscious behavior, but if we think about our own experiences, that's what really drives us too. So we have to really think about that human and what they're doing and the expectation and the emotions we're creating. This has been around a long time, but we seem to have lost our way a little bit in just making it a very functional, this is what the customer's doing and what they're trying to achieve. What are the emotions behind it? So, Michael, let's talk a little bit about that, how that is going to be
Yeah.
impacted if we do things differently.
So this is where experience management earns its seat at the table or loses it. And this is, and actually, I just want to kind of state the blindingly obvious. None of these trends that Diane and I are talking about are like brand new. It's like, oh my gosh, this is a new insight you guys uncovered. It's like, well, actually, these are old insights and they're trends that are recurring and have continued because organizations still aren't solving for these. And what's happening over time is each one of these trends is becoming more and more important as we think about experience as a discipline. So again, how do we earn that and keep that seat at the table and not lose it? And experience as a value creator and growth driver is really the way we make that happen. It's the recognition that experience has to be economically visible. Yes, friction erodes margin. We all know that. The harder it is for customers to accomplish their goals, or the harder it is for employees to serve your customers, there are financial implications for that. How do we track that? Behavior change proves the impact. And we're going to talk about some of the ways to do that specifically to track that in the framework conversation we'll get to in a moment. But if executives can't see the financial logic, experience becomes discretionary. They can absolutely see where it costs money, but they need to be able to see how it makes money. The shift is really from scorecards to business cases. If we can tie effort reduction or decrease in friction to cost to serve, if we can tie onboarding velocity to retention, trust to risk mitigation, track value realization over time, not just movement of scores, that's how experience becomes a real growth driver. But we have to make sure that the benefits of experience are tracked, that they're visible, and that they're tracked and communicated in ways that matter to stakeholders across our organization. We worked with one organization where the CX leader did basically the same data set, but reframed it in about 12 different ways, presented to 12 different stakeholders, all of whom were on the executive committee to make the decision about where investments are made. Because the reality is, and Diane touched on this a little bit earlier, when it comes time to looking for investments in your experience improvement initiatives, get every other part of your organization, there's somebody else there with their hand out. Right. So if you can't prove how your piece of this, again, shifting from dashboards to business cases or scorecards to business cases, right, your efforts aren't going to be funded. It's not just about emotions, although emotions are critical to experience. Experience lives between our ears and our customers' ears. But if we can't track it, it's not seen as valuable.
And that really comes down to the last trend of leadership and change. Now, this is, as Michael said, none of this is new. This has been, if you talk to any practitioner, number one, my leaders don't get it. They nod their head, but they're not really helping me to move the organization and evolve the organization in the way that they work. Because you think about when we talked about fragmentation, that's really a leadership failure. All the leaders coming together, when you talk to them, everybody's listening and focused on what they need to get done, but they don't recognize and haven't really taken the time to understand that it's really about changing customer behavior. And when you do that, it's not just for your particular department, but more for overall how the brand experience comes to life and how the return on investment becomes about everything that you're doing, that additive business value, we call it. So helping them to understand that this is more of the way the organization needs to work. So every leader I've talked to has said we need to be more agile. We need to move faster. We need to make different investments. We need to get AI out there right away. But they don't talk about how they're going to do that well. And so we need to help them educate around why it's important to think more holistically and design more holistically, and really think about what's not just what's in it for me as it relates to every individual on the leadership team, but overall how that additive business value of looking at an experience and saying there are process improvements, there are workflow and improvements, there are employee experience improvements, there's customer improvements we're going to make. And all of those can impact cost to serve, cost to acquisition, revenue. So we're not helping with what Michael talked about. We're not helping leadership understand you're not going to get those benefits if you're not thinking about it and designing and building more holistically. So we think about then if the culture needs to change, it's really about creating a system for it to change. So thinking about putting a train on a train track, right? If you don't have a system of how you're going to do this work and you don't have it identified as this is what we're going to do differently as an organization, it makes it very difficult to come in and ask for money and investment in something that doesn't really have a path forward, the business case and how the organization is going to align to the solution. So let's talk. We've talked a lot about what's happening. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the actual framework of where we're headed. And so we'll get started with the experience operating system. So in the book that we talked about, Michael and I, one of the things that we really wanted to focus on is how we take this complexity and boil it down to these are, it's a systematic way to approach how you're building capabilities within the organization. Now, none of these categories are very different, except you can see technology and business processes are also a part of it. And that's because those business processes sometimes are the problem, but it's also part of the solution. How do we make this just part of how the capability for experience management becomes part of that human? So, Michael, you want to explain a little bit more about?
Yeah. So as Diane noted, and as I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, we've seen these things play out in dozens, if not hundreds, of organizations over the last 20 years of our careers doing this kind of work. And it's because operationalizing experience really does require a system. And importantly, if we think about how each of these capabilities links together, you can link them together with systems. Clearly, you can link them together with technology, which is the way that most organizations approach this, right? It's like, let's put technology in place. Let's, systematize this from a internal perspective. But it's not a way to actually connect people across the organization. And I'm sure that we've all heard the talk about blowing up silos, knocking down silos. The reality is that silos are in place for very good reasons, and that organizations require those as part of their essentially the way that they work, their operating model. And when we talk about the experience operating system, we're not talking about replacing existing operating models. This is how do you actually link different parts of the organization, leveraging the operating models that are in place, but making the human the center of the conversation so that people, which are really the superpower of the experience operating system, understand how different parts of the organization affect them and understand how their actions affect different parts of the organization and how all this together affects customer and employee experience. The goal of the XOS, the Experience Operating System, is connect experience to enterprise strategy across the organization. Is to make value visible financially and operationally, and really turn experience from initiative into infrastructure. Diane mentioned this earlier, and we've talked about this many times. Experience isn't something that you spread on top of the cake after it's baked. It has to be baked into the cake. And we use the analogy of safety or quality, the analogies of safety and quality. You know, if safety is really critical to your organization, you don't call the safety team after somebody's lost an arm because it's too late, right? Safety has to be just part of the way the organization works. Same with quality, right? If you wait for the wheels to fall off the car, you've waited too long. But if quality is part of the way the organization works, the wheels aren't going to fall off because everyone in the organization knows their role. They know their responsibilities and they know what they need to do to actually make safety and quality a priority. Our job is to help make experience a priority by connecting it to the careabouts of executives and the goals and strategies of the organization.
Well said. So, what are some of the other frameworks that can help us to do that, to systematically do that? So, we see journey management. For those of you who may or may not have a definition of that, we've been working with journey mapping, and that would become one of the things that, like, let's really understand the customer. Journey management, journey mapping is a design tool. What we're talking about is journey management, the backbone of how you look at the opportunities, you think about what is going to happen, and you manage to that journey. Actually, you're pulling all not just the journey itself and all the onstage things that are happening, but you're looking at the offstage things, all the systems and processes and content, context within the organization of what's happening and how is that experience getting delivered. And then the ability to manage over time the entire journey. Now, I know that seems overwhelming, but when you think about managing it, it's managing it to what do we want to become? Do we have that future experience we're trying to create? Is everybody aligned to that? Are we continually looking at the opportunities and looking holistically end to end, top to bottom, to say every change we make has all these ripple effects, like dropping a stone in a pond? All these ripple effects, have we really brought that to bear and made it a practice? So I'll tell you, an organization that we're working with right now, they have a journey management practice. They've assigned journey owners, and they've got a lot of the tools, and they're upskilling their people. But guess what? They're doing those journeys. The journey owners are doing their journeys without a standard, without a way to go forward for here's the journey we're after. They're got using different artifacts and tools for their business cases or their exploration of their insights. They're tapping different data. So they're not really pulling it together. That's the importance of being the connective tissue when you're an experienced leader, is that you can help with the management of this journey and the portfolio of things that you're doing from a holistic view to not only design, but also measure the impact that a change that experience has, whether that's employee, customer, or both, as well as the organization, like processes we talked about. So your opportunity there is to begin to think about how do I bring a cross-functional team together and really make this become a storyline and a way of working so that the organization can see the benefits financially, organizationally, from a skill standpoint, and from a speed and ability standpoint to build the capability to do journey management. Let's talk then, if that's the case, what do you need? Okay, once you have that in place and you have this backbone, if you will, what are the next things that you need to do? So if we talk a little bit about systems thinking, now system thinking goes back a long way, so it's not a new term, but systems thinking in addition to human-centered design, the ability to see all the things that are happening and looking for where does this particular experience go next? What happens when they do this? What are the things backstage that need to happen? Who gets that content? Where does the content get put into? Where is the data? How is it getting used? All of those things are system thinking. If we combine that with designing from a human-centered perspective, these experience problems, we can find better root cause, we can find better solutions because we're fixing more things knowing that they compound to the point of that experience debt. We're band-aiding a lot of things. It's that hero mentality that Michael talked about. So your culture can't compensate for that. You need the structure. And every issue has an upstream driver. So I always say people talk about the call center and getting, the agents and getting more data in and how AI is helping them. Well, why are they needing to call contact center in the first place or chat or go to the chat bot? What's happening that's creating that opportunity and a signal, of course, before that happens, before they have to make that call or have that chat.
Yeah,
So
very cool.
designing without a systems thinking is like being in a theater and not having the people backstage, the prop person, the orchestrator, the person who wrote the music, not thinking about all those things that are happening when you go to see a play or you go to see a concert, right? It's how all that comes together. And so our responsibility is to help the organization embed ways that we're going to be doing it differently. And then we'll talk a little bit about more change, but this misalignment, and we talk about it really being a people problem, it's more of an operational problem, more of a systems problem. Michael, do you have a comment?
Yeah, no, please.
Okay, all right. So you do that. How are you going to know? So Michael, you want to talk a little bit about, okay,
Yeah.
now we said we have a problem with the executives. Now what do we do?
Yeah. Well, I think it's less us having a problem with executives than us having a problem talking to executives in the language they understand. And it's really because executives don't fund sentiment, they fund economics, right? Operations shape perception, perception drives behavior, behavior drives business outcomes. So what this means is the measurement conversation really has to evolve. And as we think about, satisfaction as a measure, for example, or NPS, pick your quote unquote typical CX metric. You're measuring this perception stage. And this is, again, this is a framework that we've applied inside, multiple organizations of significant size and scale, as well as smaller organizations. But it's understanding how, kind of working from the bottom up, how what you do to your customers, what happens to them, what you can actually observe, like the number of times that somebody gets served a chatbot from your website, just for example. Um, how does that change how customers feel? What are their perceptions at different stages of the journey and or at different touch points, different interactions? Because if we know what we're doing to our customers and we know how that makes them feel, we can then track the behaviors based on how they feel. What do they actually do? And customers are going to do different things based on different feelings and different experiences. Some may buy more, some may buy less, some may leave, but the reality is that those behaviors connect to business outcomes. And you can measure, essentially, if you think about this as a stack, if you can link your operational data to your customer feelings, to your behavioral data, then that gives you the ability to say, if our customers do more of this or less of this, we're going to drive business outcomes up or down as a result. And that's a language that organizations actually understand. We think about measures and metrics. This is a constant conversation in virtually every organization that we work with. But there's a man named Mark Levy who writes the newsletter Decoding Customer Experience, which I've recently started reading that, like in the last probably 6 months or so. Pretty interesting stuff. So check that out. But he was saying, what if we actually measured things that matter to customers, not NPS, not satisfaction? What if we measured things like our broken promise rate or time to human relief or the customer effort to escape? And I don't know, I found that particularly funny because it's also so true when you think about what are customers, how hard do they have to work to get out of our ecosystem? How many times have we told them things that aren't true? How many promises have we made that organizationally we break? But all of those kinds of things mean shifting from the current way of looking at measurement to looking at it through two different lenses. One is, what do our customers actually care about? And two is, what are the business outcomes of the experiences that our customers are having? And I think
So
that leads us pretty neatly into emotions.
yes, yes, thanks for the lead in. I'll pay you later on the table. For those of you who don't know me, I started my life as my life. I started my career as a clinical psychologist. So human behavior has always been something that I have studied and have brought into my practices because if you think about the way that you operate and the way you make decisions, whether it's conscious or subconscious, it's how you feel about your interaction. If you get frustrated with something like the chatbot I talked about, if you have a great experience with an organization who's always consistent, always recovers from, even if they have an opportunity, they recover and they overcompensate for it. Those things really drive the emotion. So if our behavior is driven by emotion, then why aren't we tackling that just like we are the behaviors? This sentiment scores and some of those things, people look at the scores and say, yeah, they're feeling okay about it. That's not really where we need to focus. We need to focus on understanding those and really driving how we design to make sure we're not focused on letting value destroyers, where it's like, rolling eyes and heavy sighs and all those things that we know are symptoms of having bad experiences and emotions that are not positive, to the way we really feel about these value creators, trust and joy and ability to get value from who we're in understanding with. So those of you who haven't looked at Plutchik's wheel of the primary emotions and all that go around, the 34,000 emotions that humans can experience, this needs to be a part of how you design. We always map it out in a journey and we talk about, no, they feel this way or that way, but we never go back and say, what do we want them to feel? Is this kind of a meh experience? Does it really need to be there? Or is it clearly a place where we need to shine, like onboarding? Always, always, always an opportunity, every organization we work with, because it's fraught with, you didn't have me at hello. You didn't make me feel welcome. You didn't take care of things for me. You said it was going to be easy and I was getting all these benefits. I'm still 6 months in and not quite sure if I made the right decision. Those are critical factors when they get ready to renew or they continue working with you and buying from you. So if you're really thinking about how this comes to life, what we try to do is make leaders really think about their own experiences and how those emotions drive behavior and how they change their behavior with brand. So it's a great way to talk to leadership about, well, if we're going to change behavior, we have to make people feel differently. That's just the way we're built. We actually spend, as human beings, we spend more effort to avoid a bad experience than we do to find a positive one. So that should tell you something about, if you haven't thought about this and put this into the framework of what you're doing systematically, it's not going to show up and you won't be able to achieve the goals that you're after. So let's move over to, okay, you told me all this stuff. Now, what are the things that I need to do? So let's take you through a little bit of the kind of primary areas of focus that we've talked about. We've kind of dripped in some things like build your acumen around business value, some of those pieces you've heard. But what we really want you to think about is the strategic approach, operational, and leadership. Defining what experience led means here, meaning for your organization. You hear us talk a little bit about CX, but you'll hear us talk more about experience management. We want to elevate the fact that this is a discipline and we are managing the experiences just like marketing manages expectations and the brand experience. How do we really start to define ourselves? Are we experience led? Are we including employees and partners and looking more holistically, or is it all about the customer, which people still can't connect? So part of this is really thinking about, is your strategic plan really strategic? And does it have those systematic approaches? Are you looking at how the organization operates to improve experiences? Or are you just looking at, we're going to increase net promoter score? Aligning experience priorities to business outcomes. If you haven't taken your goals for 2026 from the organization and figured out exactly how you're going to contribute, and I don't mean P&L directly, I mean how are you going to enable the organization and facilitate the way that the organization is going to achieve those goals? Because we have that power. We're really one of the few organizations and disciplines and business units that's our job, is to look holistically and help the organization work better together. And then this governance that we have around experience. Do you have experience design standards? And I don't mean the button is a certain color. What I mean is, are we anticipating that when we do something, is it going to create value for the customer? Do we know what those things are? Are we working holistically? Are we moving back into our silos and not working that way? That's the type of governance we're talking about. It's not just a council, it's having everybody feel and understand why they're accountable for this and what it means for them and for the brand. Operationally, assigning ownership to those critical journeys. So I talked about a little bit about be careful when you're doing journey management that you do have a structure in place to make sure those journeys stay together and that you have the owners really driving all of these other things we've talked about, using the right data, finding those signals, building things into the organization. It's also about closed loop action system, not just feedback. So closed loop action system means that you are taking action to be more proactive and preemptive with how a customer feels and works with the organization. So while we think about closed loop, it's if we have a goal of what the customer wants to achieve, how do we close that loop and make sure that that happens? That's part of we talk about outer loop a lot, but it's how do we get more proactive about it? And then really integrating these experience insights into planning and decision forums. If your organization and your leaders don't understand the financial impact of changing emotion, changes in behavior and those outcomes, then they're going to look at it for just a planning and it's one more thing we have to consider rather than decision. For leadership, model that human-centered decision making. Help them understand how that needs to happen. Give them case studies. Talk to them about here's one project we did where it worked very well and the light bulbs that will go on for them. Looking at highlighting rewarding teams for reducing that friction we talked about. And then investing in experience capabilities, the literacy and confidence. This is about educating the organization, giving them the skills and knowledge that they need to build their own competencies around this is going to be the way we work. If we don't start doing this, if we don't have these things in place as we begin to just put AI into everything and we're not thinking about the experience first, enabled by AI, we're not going to make progress. So think about an example like that to say if we don't do that right, it's going to create churn, it's going to impact our financial outcomes. It's a great way to begin to talk about how these things need to happen in order to make even AI being applied work for the organization, let alone product and all the other things that we talk about. So Micah, you want to talk a little bit about how that future-ready leadership is going to start?
Yeah. So we have just a couple of slides. I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, but have taken this home, so to speak. A couple of things. The questions that we're asking here aren't rhetorical; they're diagnostic. That would say, if experience management disappeared tomorrow, what would fail in your organization? Another way to look at that is, what would change if experience was treated as a leadership discipline, not just a CX function? Understanding where humans are compensating for broken systems, so where experience debt is quietly compounding. Asking these diagnostic questions and coming up with the answers allow you to then look forward. So you can ask what comes next question. Are we designing only for the customers we have or for the ones that are coming? Where's trust going to be most fragile in the next 2 years, for example? Are our systems getting smarter or just faster, right? Are we just making, poor systems work more efficiently, which actually doesn't improve the experience, as it turns out. And if experience is truly a priority, where is it visible in decision-making today? And I think the last thing that kind of ties a lot of this together on this slide is how confident are you that your systems treat humans well and that they do that by design? So the last page here is really recognition that experience management is no longer about proving relevance. It's about discipline, economic impact, and leadership maturity. Because organizations that operationalize experience, that actually put an experience operating system in place that's human first and deliberate, they don't just outperform. They build resilience, they earn trust, and they scale with confidence. So the question isn't really, does experience matter? Of course, the answer is yes. But the big question is, are you managing customer experience as an organization like it does matter? So with that, I think quick.
You all probably have lots of questions. We've mentioned a lot of things, so we'll look at the questions that are there and maybe answer a couple, but please be assured that if you ask a question in the chat, include a contact and email, and we'll get back to you. We want to make sure that anything we've introduced or you need more examples or you want us to dive deeper, happy to connect with you and walk through those things. So Richard, do we have some questions?
Well, I'm just conscious that we're only 3 minutes to the top of the hour and people have places to be. So I guess we'll just say thank you very much to both of you for your time today and for sharing all of the information. As you said, Diane, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat now. And what we'll do is we'll share the recording of today's session along with the slide deck, and we'll also share Diane and Michael's contact details so they can answer any of your questions if you have any further questions. Is that all right with you, Diane?
That sounds great. Sounds great. Lovely to see all of you this morning. Thanks for coming here. Mark,
Greatly appreciated.
Yeah, and thank you both for your time, and thank you everybody for joining us. If you do want to enter the awards, please scan the QR code on the screen now, or reach out to any of us. We look forward to seeing you all again on the next one. And thanks again, Diane and Michael, for your time today.
Of course.
Thank you, Richard and Mark, and all of you for joining.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.